All right, so what we're going to look at here in this last part of cellular respiration is something called the electron transport chain. Okay, so the electron transport chain is a sequence, a series of proteins, essentially these enzyme proteins, or rather these protein enzymes that are embedded within the one of the membranes of our mitochondria, right? So if you recall from a previous part, we were talking about our mitochondria here. We've got this outer membrane here. We have this inner membrane in yellow. The space in the middle of that inner membrane is called the matrix. And then there's a space in between the inner and outer membranes, and that was called the intermembrane space. Okay, the intermembrane space. And so what's going to happen here is there's going to be this these sequence of enzymes, and we'll look at them that are going to be embedded within the folds of this inner membrane. So in the folds of this yellow membrane, and these are called cristae, these folds of the inner membrane of our mitochondria. Okay. So what's going to happen are all of those NADHs and all of those FADH2s that we produced back in glycolysis and the Krebs cycle and all of our other kind of steps leading up to this, all of those are going to bring their electrons to this sequence of proteins, this electron transport chain, as it were, and essentially allow for the movement of hydrogen ions from the matrix, so again, from this space on the inside of this inner membrane into the intermembrane space. So hydrogen ions are going to go from the matrix into this intermembrane space, or this outer compartment. And then what they're going to do is, after you've created this gradient of hydrogen ions, high concentration in the intermembrane space and a lower concentration in the matrix, they're going to flow through this protein called ATP synthase. And ATP synthase does exactly what its name suggests. It's going to synthesize ATP, right? So the electrons are going to be shuttled down these proteins. They're going to be accepted at the end by oxygen. It's going to combine with hydrogen and form water. And then the main thing that we're producing here is the ATP, right? That's kind of our main goal here, if you will, right? So to understand this, we need to first look at our electron carriers, right? Those NADHs and FADH2s. So essentially, remember, the NADHs and the FADH2s, they're slightly different, but they're doing something very similar in the sense that they are carrying these electrons. And so this is NAD+, this is the oxidized form, and then NADH, this is the reduced form. So these are the reduction and the oxidation. This has to do with the gaining or loss of electrons. Okay. So in this case, what's happening is the oxidized form. There's a mnemonic called oil rig, OIL-RIG. OIL is oxidation is loss of electrons, and RIG is reduction is gain. Okay. So what's happening here is the NAD, this is the oxidized form. Remember, OIL, oxidation is loss of electrons, so it has this positive charge. And then here, reduced version, so reduction is gain. It gains the hydrogen along with an electron, and so it's NADH. So this is the reduced form. This is the oxidized form. So what's happening is we're taking our NADH here, so we're taking this reduced form to the electron transport chain, and we're going to oxidize it, so meaning we're going to release these electrons and form the oxidized version. Okay. So what this phase is, what this process is really called, is oxidative phosphorylation. Okay. So this is occurring in the presence of oxygen, and we are oxidizing NADH into NAD+, which releases these electrons and releases these hydrogen ions as well. As we'll see, those will get pumped across the membrane. Okay, so similar thing is happening with FADH2 as well. So what we see here is we can see our membrane, we can see our NADHs and our FADH2s, and then we see this large blue protein here. Okay, so just for reference, this intermembrane space, remember that's the space in between the inner and outer membrane. So here's the inner membrane. There would also be an outer membrane out here. And then you have this mitochondrial matrix within the inner membrane. Okay, so whenever these NADHs and these FADH2s arrive to these sequences of proteins, they are going to release their electrons. The electrons are kind of denoted by these little stars here. Those electrons are going to get released. They're going to be shuttled from one protein to the next, and that's going to drive and power the movement of hydrogen ions from this matrix to the intermembrane space, right? So again, the FADHs and the NADHs, those are releasing the hydrogen ions, and then those hydrogen ions are getting pumped across. Okay. So what happens is these hydrogen ions accumulate in this intermembrane space. You have a high concentration, and so they're going to flow through this protein called ATP synthase. So this blue protein here is called ATP synthase. And what it's going to do is there's essentially like a little turbine engine in this protein, this ATP synthase, and it's going to synthesize ATP. It's going to phosphorylate ADP and phosphate to produce ATP, right? So there's our ATP, there's our energy. These electrons, as they work their way down these proteins, and I'll mention the names of these proteins in just a moment, they're going to be combined with oxygen along with some of the hydrogens here. And when you combine the oxygens, when you combine the hydrogens, the oxygen, and the electrons, you get H2O. You get water. Okay, you get water. So if we go back here for a second to the NADHs and FADH2s, each NADH is going to contribute about 3 ATP, and each FADH2 is going to contribute about 2 ATP, right? The reason for this is notice where NADH and FADH2, notice where they enter this electron transport chain. NADH enters at this first protein here. This is called complex 1. This is complex 2, complex 3, complex 4. Whereas FADH2 enters at this second complex, complex 2. So because NADH enters first, or it enters earlier in the electron transport chain, it contributes to more hydrogen ions being pumped across, and thus ultimately contributes to the formation of more ATP. FADH2 doesn't enter until this complex 2, so it contributes to fewer hydrogen ions being pumped across, so it contributes to only 2 ATP instead of 3, right? So you've got these 4 complexes here, complex 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then these 2 coenzymes. So you've got one right here, and you've got one right here. These are called ubiquinone and cytochrome C. Okay, and these are carrying the electrons from one to the next and allowing hydrogen ions to be pumped across into that intermembrane space. They accumulate there, and then they flow through ATP synthase, right? So you can look at a very similar image, slightly different though, in this picture right here. So left, we've got our NADHs. Again, notice they're entering early in the electron transport chain. So complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here's the ubiquinone. Here's the cytochrome C. Here's ATP synthase. They get hydrogen ions get pumped from the matrix to the intermembrane space. They flow through ATP synthase, and we produce ATP. So notice they enter this. The electrons enter this first complex here. Whereas when we look at FADH2, it's entering at this second complex, not the first. Okay, so it's entering at the second one, so proportionally it has fewer hydrogen ions that are being pumped across, so fewer hydrogen ions that flow through ATP synthase, so it produces less ATP. Again, NADH about 3, FADH2 about 2. Okay, so this here is a kind of an overview of some of those steps here of the electron transport chain. So again, NADHs, FADH2s contribute their electrons. They allow for the pumping, the movement of hydrogen ions from the matrix to that intermembrane space, and then the hydrogen ions flow through ATP synthase to produce lots and lots of ATP. Okay. So, summary of electron transport chain, oxidative phosphorylation, and then just a general summary of cellular respiration as a whole. So again, glycolysis, that intermediate pyruvate oxidation stage, citric acid cycle, and then our electron transport chain, our oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so again, we're making lots of ATP, right? We're producing large quantities of ATP. You can kind of see what we're making in each, right? So you can kind of count up each that we have. So again, each NADH is about 3, right? So that's 10 NADHs, so that's about 30. Each FADH2 is 2, so we have 2 of those, so that's 4, so 34, plus our 4 that we made in the citric acid cycle, and the net of 2 in glycolysis, that's another 4. So about 38 ATP total per glucose, right? So for one glucose molecule, on average, somewhere around 38 ATP molecules are produced. Okay, so this is where we're going to wrap up our cellular respiration. Again, ask yourself, where are these phases occurring in the cell? Does it require oxygen, so anaerobic or aerobic? What do we start with, and then what do we end with? Okay, so please reach out if you have any questions, and I will be happy to answer.